Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us for this discussion of the Umbrellas of Cherbourg. I am Andrew Douglas, Senior Director of Education at Bryn Mawr Film Institute, and I am joined by one of our wonderful instructors and the wonderful instructor who not only suggested this film, but pulled out all the stops in her introduction, Jennifer Fleeger. Jennifer, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you. And welcome to some Ursinus students here too tonight.
Yes, we are very happy to be joined by some of the students in one of Jennifer's classes. She teaches at Ursinus. So for everyone who is joining us, let's go over the procedures. Please keep your audio on mute unless you are asking a question or making a comment. You will know that it is your turn to ask a question or make a comment because I will call on you. And I will know to call on you because you will use the raise hand function that is within Zoom that you can see illustrated or pointed out with the number 2 on your screen. We would also encourage you to use the chat function to introduce yourself, to chat amongst yourselves with the other folks who are participating as well. And my colleague Jill is sitting in on the chat as well. So if there's any urgent questions that come up or anything like that, we'll be sure to mention them. In addition, you can either use the chat or visit our website and go to the Where in the World section to let us know where you're joining us from. As you can see, we have folks joining us from all over the country and indeed all over the world, or we have had such folks. And if you're one of them, we'd love to know where you're joining us from and how you heard about us and how you think we're doing. With that, I think we are ready to get started. I see, oh my goodness, I think somebody beat our regular first speaker, David, to the punch. And so I'm sorry, David, you'll have to wait because I am going to go to Joan. Joan, you have a question or comment?
I have a comment.
Okay.
I've seen the movie several times over the years, and I enjoy it every time I see it. But this time when I was watching it, I remembered the plot, especially that last scene at the service station. But this time watching the movie, I was mesmerized by the colors, and I concentrated more on that than the actual story. I noticed that the clothes they wore matched the wallpaper in the rooms. Also, the walls match the walls inside and outside the umbrella shop. And in one particular scene with Catherine Deneuve, she was in a bedroom and she was wearing a dress that was the same pattern as the wallpaper in the room. I think I concentrated more on the scenery this time than the love story. The music was beautiful, especially that theme, I Will Wait for You, which in my opinion is one of the most beautiful melodies ever written. And I just wanted to comment on how much I enjoyed it, and I will enjoy seeing it again and again. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Joan. And if you didn't articulate the use of color as well as you did, one could always just look at Jennifer's background and see the matching going on there. Yes, this color is a huge part of this film. In fact, those of you who get our emails notice that this film inspired our question of the week on Saturday about the most colorful, we asked people to suggest the most colorful films because this one is so striking for its color. Jennifer, thoughts about the colors in this movie?
Yeah, I have 2 things to say about it. One, we're just so thankful that the movie has been restored to its proper color, digitally done some years ago, because without that, when you were seeing this movie, if you had ever seen it on VHS tape or something, it just didn't hold up at all, and you might have wondered what all the fuss was about. But now that you can really see the vibrancy of each shot, and you're totally right. The other thing I wanted to say is you're absolutely right about it matching the wallpaper. Andrew and I, before we brought everybody on here, we were talking about, Andrew mentioned whether there was some connection with Douglas Sirk and the melodrama. And one of the things that happens in Sirk's films and in melodrama in general is that the characters' emotions get kind of externalized and like splashed all over the room. And here, I mean, that's true in a way, but you almost feel like as if gender has been splashed all over the room. You know, there's a way in which everything that they feel and everything that contains them about being a woman or being a dude is just like everywhere, all over the place. And that might have something to do with the tradition of why they're so closely matched. But it's also just delightful to watch, as you point out.
I mean, one of the things that musicals and melodramas have in common is their ability to dispense with the notion of subtext, that they can be about what they're about out there. It's like if the movie were a person, it's wearing its heart on its sleeve. And the vibrant use of color in ways that we would never expect to see in quote unquote the real world, it is one of the opportunities that making either a certain kind of melodrama or more often a musical. And I think of another film that you brought for us, Jennifer, Meet Me in St. Louis, another musical that takes ample advantage of the ability to have the most vivid colors. Thank you for that, Joan. Let's see. David.
Yes, I was ever so slightly late on the draw. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. It won't happen again.
Well, that's okay. We just have proof now that you're an actual person and not some sort of robot from the future who discovered our little discussions here. So that's
no. I'm actually tonight. I'm a robot from the past. Now that you're giving me a wonderful lead-in. Somewhere either 1969 or 1970, I took a film course at Penn State. And even though I know now that I don't remember most of what went on in that film class, and I know now how much more I've learned as an adult than I learned in that 10 weeks, this was one of the films that I have always remembered being in that film class. And it obviously at the time was relatively new. And I was thinking about the fact that you tell us to look at a film from when it was produced, not necessarily today, which I certainly tried to do back in the 69 or 70 timeframe. And I realized today that I was ill-equipped at the time to even understand the film. Ill-equipped, not because my Penn State professor was deficient, but because his student was deficient. But today I can see that the music is not just the one song, which I've hummed and sung for 50 plus years, but rather the totality of the music going along the whole way and keeping us in the mood, in the frame, so to speak. But I also realized today that the music and the musical allowed us to sort of overlook these things that I was looking at and then ignoring about the funny language. Part of it may be the translation, part of it between the mother and daughter, and between the lovers, and how silly some of it really was. But we didn't mind because the music and the scenery were taking us along. And Jennifer, you sort of gave us some of that in the opening. So I loved it. I love going back 51 or 2 or whatever it was years, and remembering that I actually took a film course before there was Bryn Mawr Film Institute, which I hadn't remembered until this. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those comments, David. Yeah, you were talking about sort of what I was trying to get at before a little bit, which is that there are lots of things. The colors are one of them, but there are lots of things in this movie and in the musical genre in general that filmmakers can quote unquote get away with because they've already sort of put you on notice by making this a musical that you need to suspend your disbelief to a certain degree. And one of those things is the fact that, you know, the young jeweler falls in love with Catherine Deneuve without ever really having had a conversation with her, and that the mother can be the sort of figure she is and not, you know, and still have the relationship she has with her daughter, which I would have found very trying in quote unquote real life, and all these other things. And so that's, I mean, that's one of the great things about genre, and that's one of the great things about creating a distinctive world within a film, as Demi does here. Jennifer, did David's comments bring up anything for you?
I think they brought up the idea that I don't know if you've ever seen an opera in English that was once supposed to be in Italian or German, but you feel the same kind of way if you start paying attention to the libretto, right? And it's, if you know any French at all, just je t'aime over and over again in some of these songs. Like, okay, yeah, we get it. So you're absolutely right, but this is what the overwhelming experience of this kind of music, this isn't opera, but the seeping of the melodramatic music into your soul, it allows us to feel those very simplistic dialogue as something more than it otherwise would be. So I think it's great that you make a comment about that.
I mean, it lets us go completely over the fact that the mother and the daughter get over her pregnancy in about 8 bars, which would not happen in most real life circumstances.
It's a great tragedy, and at the same time, oh well, we'll figure it out, right? As long as we can get Roland Cassard on board. But I also think, I love that you shared how you felt differently about it at the time, because this is something that I noticed about this film too. Like, it played as a tragedy when I was 18, and it doesn't play as a tragedy anymore. You know, now it's a very different kind of film. So I think that the film is already nostalgic, but our feeling about what nostalgia means for us and our place in time, I think, changes as we age.
William, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, so what struck me were all these little visual touches. So like in terms of the color, I noticed that when they were first young and in love, they were wearing pink outfits. And then when he says he's drafted, they're wearing matching blue outfits. And of course, blue tends to be associated with depression. I've noticed that a lot of people in the chat have been talking about that odd floating on a bicycle shot. And to me, that sort of suggested like the out-of-body discontent the characters were feeling. And then I really, really like the shot of the dummies that then panned over to show her in her bridal outfit, because now she's been sort of put on display and is sort of selling herself like a mannequin. So I just really liked all those visual touches in the film.
Thanks, William. Yeah, I think you mentioned that bicycle shot in your intro, Jennifer, and I think you also mentioned in your intro that that's something that Spike Lee likes to employ.
Yeah.
He
for the same reasons, but yeah.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because one time he uses it that stood out to me greatly is toward the end of Malcolm X, when Malcolm X is walking to the event at which he will eventually be assassinated. And he sort of has this despondency or this foreboding about him, which in a way is kind of comparable to how it's used in the movie. At least, you know, there's something, they're very scared about what's coming in a way, which is his departure. And the same thing is true in Malcolm X, I guess. But it's always unusual to my mind when a technique that stands out so much like that is used once in a movie. And I think it was only used once there. And I can see the point to using something once. You want it to stand out, but on the other hand, makes it seem all the more idiosyncratic to my mind.
Yeah, I always see it as imagining that this is just them floating on love, and it's not actually as substantial as they want it to be. You know, that's how I thought of it. They're floating on air, and this beautiful melody is kind of carrying the weight of the emotion of the romance, but it isn't really real. And then, of course, the second 2 acts wash it away quite neatly.
Right.
So if one could read it like you did, that's nice, as the foreboding, or William in the comments said something like that too. Or one could read it as just this kind of floaty, airy impression of love that one has when they're young.
True. Richard, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, the question is that it seemed that there was a question, at least in my mind, as to whether the mother wanted a romance with the jeweler for herself or for her daughter. And it's apparently at the actors were, the mother was 39, the actor was 35, and you know, the daughter was 20 in real life. I was wondering if it would have been a better idea to play the mother a little bit older, or is that what they wanted to do? I couldn't figure it out.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I mean, these situations where people aren't there. I mean, right. Catherine Deneuve's 20. They made her character 16 going on 17, I guess, for a reason. And so if she is 16 going on 17, her mother's age is entirely reasonable. The thing I'm not clear about is exactly how old we're supposed to think the young jeweler is. But Jennifer, do you have any thoughts on this?
He was in an earlier part
Right.
of the trilogy, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, he was in Lola. I think that the cinema has a horror of older women, and so just the suggestion, I think it's there, like in the mother's procuring for her daughter, and we see that plot a lot. But the idea that a woman who already has a daughter of varying age could herself be a romantic interest is just terrifying, isn't it? I mean, we saw Sunset Boulevard, you know, that's terrible. So I think it's just supposed to be unthinkable.
Well, we're lucky that the director saved a yellow, blue, and red copy of the movie so we could see it again in the color in which it was filmed.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that that's how the restoration took place. And thank goodness for that, because then you can really get the accuracy of the original print.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking too about the whole age thing, and I don't know. I mean, the example you gave, of course, Jennifer, is very much Hollywood, and I don't know if it's different in France or not.
Yeah, maybe you're right, because the film after this one, Young Girls of Rochefort, there is a woman who is Catherine Deneuve's mother in that one, who herself has a romance from the past that then resurfaces in the present. So maybe I'm being too pessimistic about ageism here.
Yeah, it definitely seemed to me like the mother was interested in him, but then I think once she realized her daughter was pregnant, she realized that was the more pressing need to get her married off, so to speak.
She's also, I think, more interested in status than love for herself, right?
Yes, and she could have the same status as his mother-in-law as she could as his wife, I guess. And maybe we shouldn't think about this too much. Barbara and Richard Hirsch, your question or comment?
Thanks, Andrew. It's Richard. We appreciated the film. It kind of grew on us as we were watching it. I have some questions about the decision by the director to make it, as I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, not quite an opera, but a recitative. I probably didn't pronounce that correctly.
Recitative, yeah.
Yeah, what was that always the intention? Are the other two films in the trilogy done in the same style? And if you could just add on a little bit, I was familiar with this film, although I hadn't seen it. I don't know that Lola and the young girls part of the trilogy came to the US in the same way. Those don't even sound familiar to me. So I was wondering if you could contextualize this film with the trilogy in France and contextualize it in North America. And would we understand this film differently if we saw it within the trilogies? Within the trilogy structure, in other words.
Okay, thanks for that. Jennifer, do you have any insight to share?
Yeah, Young Girls is not sung through, but it does have a huge number of songs. So in that way, this is different in that it's completely sung. The recitative would be, it's hard to really say what in this is recitative. I mean, there are little bits, you know, and then you kind of burst into song a little. So those parts would be called recitative. And that doesn't happen before this. I don't think that Lola was like that. I'm trying to remember, but certainly not the one that's after this. I don't know that you really need the other films to understand this one or to see why it's unique or interesting, but the world of Jacques Demy is full of these kinds of excessive, colorful, bursting into songs kind of moments, which this film does even though it's sung through. So it's unique in the way that it's sung through, and he had a real trouble getting funding for it because certainly nobody wanted to pay for that. It was odd. Now we have a number of sung through examples that people can come up with. And if you want to name them in the chat, you can go ahead. Jesus Christ Superstar, Les Mis, you know, they usually come from the stage to the screen, and this one didn't. So Demy did intend to have this be a sung through musical, and he did write all the lines, and then he worked with the Grand to produce the music, obviously ahead of the filming because it was playback. So yeah, it's unique in that way, and he's lucky it played well, because otherwise I don't think he would have been continuing to make films after this.
And Roquefort has Gene Kelly in it, is that right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure it would have played in the US. And this movie got praise from at least a couple of European film festivals, big European film festivals, and that would have carried a lot of currency in the US at any time, but particularly in the mid 1960s. So I'm sure that had partly to do with what was with its, commercial, or at least the opportunities for commerce for it in the US. And of course, it's also important to remember that musicals are still big business in Hollywood in the early to mid 1960s. They wouldn't be for that much longer, but it would take Hollywood a few years to realize it.
Also, Young Girls, there's 2 soundtracks. So there's an English version and a French version. So that may be differently in terms of how it played here too. And I don't know if that was because of Gene Kelly being in it. In the French version, he says some things in English and then he's dubbed partly in French for part of that movie. It's weird.
Nancy, you have a question or comment?
Yes. I had my doubts about this movie, and boy, I loved it. And one of the things that I found so moving was that the exterior sets were all so dark and depressing. It was constantly raining, and the interior sets were so beautiful and bright, and the costumes were just unbelievable. And it felt like almost a bringing to life the example of the real world was going to come in and really kind of crush these people's dreams, which essentially it did. They moved on, but it was quite moving. And then I read that the director of La La Land, he watched this movie 200 times. So that's all I had to say.
Nancy, before you go, could you just tell us, I'm curious, you said you had your doubts. Could you say from where those doubts originated?
I love movies, but the thought of watching an entire movie where it was sung, I thought it'd be very distracting. Okay. And it turned out not to be at all. You almost just didn't even think about that. It almost brought me more into the movie by making it so seamless, I guess I'd say.
Okay, thank you. Yes, if you have seen La La Land and you have seen this movie, then it is abundantly clear that Damien Chazelle saw this movie and took inspiration from it. And in a visual sense, that is wonderful. I just wish he had had the courage of his convictions that Demy had to let his movie end as it was supposed to, without that lying, deceptive, upbeat coda that just, to me, ruins the whole movie. But anyway, Jennifer, your thoughts?
The coda, that's amazing. I mean, you're right. The movie, it basically is this same movie in so many ways, especially with the jazz and the opposition there and that ending. Yeah. You're right. It's annoying. I'm completely with you. I really just wanted to compliment Nancy on that idea that the world is going to come in and seep into the fantasy life of these young people. That was a beautiful idea. And I think it plays into the ending, that idea more, because I was reading the other day some article in the Times or something that a blizzard is the only kind of natural disaster that leaves the world looking better than before it came. And that snowfall at the end, like covering over the Esso station and allowing the outdoors again to appear in this kind of beautiful and innocent state for the little child as he runs with his parents now outside the gas station, makes it seem like maybe the outdoors can go on now that these young people have dispersed and gone on about their lives. But it is, of course, filmed in Cherbourg, so it's natural that the outdoors would look like a real outdoors and that Demy would take such attention with his interior sets. It's a great comment, Nancy.
Lee, you have a question or comment?
My question is, I felt the movie was deeply touching, but I'd be interested to know, just in terms of story-wise, how it fits in the trilogy with the previous movie and the one after. Apparently, the young man is in the third movie. I just wondered what they are as a set of three.
Yeah. So Lola. Roland Cassar was in love with Lola, And then in the third one, we were meant to have the star of this one, Nino Castelnuovo, but he couldn't be acquired for the film, so he wasn't actually in it. But Catherine Deneuve is in it, but she doesn't play the same character at all. I don't really know how there would be a character crossover in the third one. Did you notice anything about that, Andrew, or anyone else? I'm trying to
No,
think. I don't think so.
No, I think that, it's sort of, how that, it's, I mean, it's not exactly the Lord of the Rings, right? I mean, it's not 3 segments of one long quest or something. I mean, it's a more loosely collected trilogy. And you see that in filmmakers' work from time to time. I mean, think about Alan Pakula's Paranoia trilogy. I mean, this is more than that because the young jeweler in this movie references the heartbreak he had in the first movie, but other than that, I think it's much more about time and place and sentiment and form or genre than it is about sort of concrete story or character elements carrying through.
Yeah, and since you said time and place, they're all port cities because Demi loves port cities. And there's also a maternal relation in the third one that's important, but I'm pretty sure that Roland Cassard is the only character that we see in the first and the second of these.
Thank you.
Let's see. Tracy, you have a question or comment?
Yes. Hi, everybody. I actually have 2 sort of comment quasi questions. The first one is, do you think that from today's viewpoint, we get our ideas that the French are so romantic from films like this, just like people from other countries get their ideas of what Americans are like from films that are well viewed? That's my first question. And my second question is, I thought that at the end of the movie, the umbrella store turned into the washing machine store. And if that was that also suggesting a change of the times from the kind of romantic, villagey nature of the place to a more, industrial, whatever modern really means. So those are my 2 questions.
Thanks for that, Tracy. I think that I think your first point is I don't know if I would point specifically to this film, but I think more broadly it's a fair observation. I think your second point is particularly interesting. I think that if you think about all the differences between an appliance store, it wasn't clear to me if it was an appliance store or a laundromat, but either way, if you think about all the differences between an appliance store or laundromat and an umbrella shop, right? If you think about all the differences that exist between those, you're really talking about some sort of mirroring or analogy to the changes in the characters from the beginning of the film to toward the end of the film, being much more practical, much more interested in more contemporary modern things, in a way more interested in material items and consumerism and things like that. I don't mean to make the character sound mercenary. I don't think they are any more mercenary than your average person, but they quote unquote they grew up and they started thinking about the things that adults either are forced to or are supposed to think about. And I think in that difference, you see some sort of analog to the difference between a shop that only sells umbrellas that, to my mind, were, more parasols and not really even that functional of umbrellas, and something as strong and solid and mechanical and utilitarian as washing machines. Jennifer, what do you think?
I agree with you. And I like what Ed commented in the chat, the corporate cleansing of the past, because there's a way in which there's something really sad. I mean, I agree, they're moving on and that's necessary in the modern world, but there's something sad about those all white walls and those white washing machines going into what had once been such a vibrant and colorful and feminine space. laundromat is, I don't think, very gendered, even though women mostly do the laundry. So there's just like this lack of like an absence of personality, and the gas station also being this all white glossy kind of place kind of matches that. Like we're moving away from a Cherbourg that was distinctive and nostalgic and beautiful and into the future. And because the whole film is nostalgic about the past, it's natural that its transformation from youth to maturity would be nostalgic as well.
I mean, I do like that his Guy's move to maturity and adulthood and being what the sort of provider a man at that point in time in the movies anyway supposed to be. I love that it still has a connection to his boyhood toy.
Yeah.
The 10-year-old Andrew was mad at the current Andrew for watching a French musical, but he was glad to be able to see that Esso garage toy set as often as he did in the movie. And I thought it was, you talk about nostalgia, I thought it was that he doesn't just get to have his own shop, which is a very sort of, grown-up industrious accomplishment, but it's one that is inspired by the toy he had, and that he had to, after he came back from seeing who knows what and doing who knows what in Algeria, he had to put right back where on the floor where he used to play with it. I thought that was a very interesting and telling choice.
And then it makes me sad about Genevieve, because I mean, she just really became what her mother wanted her to become in the end, right? She never really wanted to marry Roland. She married Roland. She has the money, but she doesn't have an Esso station.
No.
What is there for Genevieve to hold on to at the end of the
Right.
season?
Right. And in a way, I mean, you have to think about what's the less sad message? Would it be sadder? She's in that life and she doesn't seem particularly happy about it, but would it be even sadder in a way if she was in that life and had grown to love it? Does the ending suggest that some part of that, free thinking, sparkling young woman we met at the beginning, that she's in there somewhere and isn't quite satisfied with things? I don't know if that's better or worse.
I think you're right there, because I certainly don't believe that Jacques Demy, married to Agnes Varda, is an anti-feminist by any means. So I would much more believe it was a critique of the possibilities for women in the era, especially pregnant women in this time, than a condemnation of feminine goals or something like that.
Dana, you have a question or comment?
Yep. First of all, Andrew, you cannot say one thing, because obviously you have no idea what it must have been like to be a 15-year-old in 1964. So shh, okay? This is a deadly serious film to me. And hidden behind all this color and fluff and music is a theme at the end, which is not carried out in other movies that certainly I remember seeing in the 60s. I mean, those of us who watched movies like this in the 60s were raised on Disney. When you're raised on Disney, you're a princess, you fall in love once, you marry that handsome prince, and you're happy forever. There's no such thing as sex or anything like that. We'll get to that in a minute. But that's how we were raised as children. Okay, along come the 60s. And in the 60s, we see these wonderful movies. And I'm thinking about two specific movies that remind me of this one. They're not really a whole lot like it. One is Fanny. And the other one is a movie that I absolutely love called Love with the Proper Stranger. And in both of those, right? Both of those movies in the 60s, yeah, the women fall in love and get pregnant. And lo and behold, at the end of it, even in Fanny, it took a long time, but they both wind up marrying the fathers of the child, because that's what happened in the 60s. And that came out of a beginning of the Disney years. I mean, you fell in love with handsome prince. And then of course, by the time you became a teenager and sex got introduced, you absolutely had to marry the prince. I'm saying all this because this movie is deadly serious, because it doesn't turn out that way. And I agree with you, Jennifer, when you say it could have been tragic. I mean, I can only imagine if I saw this when I was 15, I would have been hysterical on the floor that this magnificent gas station guy is not getting the girl. I mean, he was the handsome, sexy one. He was the prince. I mean, that's how it has to be. So this movie was hidden behind all this fluff and color, a really different movie coming out of the 60s with a very different message. And I found myself really loving watching the ending now, but I'm 70, thinking, whoa, 50 years ago or more, I would have been absolutely hysterical. I would have been on the floor for 2 days, miserable. So I think you have to be very serious about these movies that came out of this time period and what they normally did and what this movie really didn't do. So, okay, you can say one thing if you want to, Andrew, but I don't know if you get that at all.
Well, as always, I appreciate a stern talking to from you, Dana. Thank you for putting me in my appropriate place chronologically, if in no other way. I understand. I don't understand in a first person, sympathy sense, but I understand in a sort of intellectual. I know how movies work, and I have had experiences with movies that I read one way when I was a certain age, and I read another way now, although I've also been told that I have the disposition of an 80-year-old man since I was about 12. So maybe I don't fully understand what you're saying, but I can see how, I mean, any movie that is about, choices and life turning out, a way that either is or isn't the way one anticipated is going to be perceived differently based on where one is in the sort of spectrum of the decision-making process and the existence of the characters. So I certainly get that. But you really probably wanted to hear from Jennifer on this, so I'll stop talking. Jennifer.
I think what she said is fantastic. And I think that it makes me realize that we should say something about how Demy had been dismissed because of films like this. I mean, some people think that he made a bunch of fluff when his new wave colleagues were doing serious work, like Godard making revolutionary films, and even his own wife, Varda, making documentaries and films like Cleo from 5 to 7 that are about the experience of a woman waiting for a cancer test. That's what that movie's about. And it's amazing, and it's serious, and it's feminist. And here he's making Umbrellas of Cherbourg. But Dana pointed out that there's something deadly serious about this too. And that we can't just dismiss this film because it's pretty and colorful and has music. That the message of this is just as earnest as his colleagues were. He's just doing it through the idiom of the musical.
No, I mean, in a way, it's...
I'm teasing you, Andrew. I was teasing you. I was teasing you, Andrew.
I know, that's fine. In a way, I think of this movie as sort of... It's weird because in a way it's something like The Graduate, because you look at it, and if you just look at it, literally like take a look at it, you think, well, that seems like a pretty good life or a pretty pleasant place to be. What do you have to be upset about? But of course, there's always somebody worse off, and there's always somebody better off, no matter what situation a person is in. That's true. And while we may say, that there are elements of this film that appear to be, fluffy, at their core, it's about a young woman facing challenges and having to make decisions and dealing with real sort of social problems that were certainly not unique to her in that period or in any other period or many other periods. And that's true of The Graduate as well, no matter, whether the family has a swimming pool and the kid gets a scuba suit for his birthday, that's still the case. And you think about the films that are being made, the sort of kitchen sink movies that are being made in Britain around this time that are about the social problems and challenges faced by, different people in a different social situation. They look very, very different from a movie like this one. But at their core, there are the elements of class and the immutability, or the limited possibilities due to one's gender or place in the determined social strata. And in that regard, it's dealing with very serious things, no matter how colorful or pleasant it is to look at. And I mean, I've always been one who says, when it comes to movies, you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And if you can't use a telegram to send your message and you're going to use a movie, why not make it a movie that is in other ways or many ways interesting and appealing? And I think that's what's happening here. Max, you have a question or comment? I think I put Max to sleep. Oh, Max, you're there. Go ahead. You seem unmuted, Max, but we don't hear you. Maybe we'll come back to you, Max. Christopher, you have a question.
Yes, I do have a question.
Oh,
it was more of a comment on like.
I'm sorry, Max, are you there now?
Yeah, I'm here now.
Okay, go ahead, Max. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I was trying to talk about how I didn't know if I missed something in the film, but I didn't exactly understand why Genevieve and Guy drifted apart while he was overseas. Like, it seemed as though he was sending mail to her, because like he commented on how she seemed to be less interested in her responses, but then she also commented on how he wasn't sending mail. So like I didn't understand exactly what the dynamic there was, whether it was just a commentary on how people drift apart when people go overseas for war, or exactly what was going on there.
Sure. Jennifer, do you have thoughts on that?
I just got the impression that he only sent 1 or 2 letters in that amount of time, and that this wasn't enough to sustain a romance given her condition, and so she needed somebody a little bit more substantial in order to make sure that the child had a future. And the decision was about that. She still loved him, but there wasn't a commitment there that she could count on, I think.
Right. I mean, he wasn't present in the relationship, and one could say, well, he's been drafted into the military and he's on another continent, but he perceived her as not being very present in the relationship, particularly in the latter months. So I think it is one. I think it's a lesson on how those, there are those differing perspectives. He doesn't seem to either recognize or take ownership of his lack of communication, and I think that it's meant to be sort of representative of how people do drift apart. I mean, one person in a couple goes off to college in another city and one doesn't, or whatever the version is. I think that's what it's meant to be representative of, and it's not. I think we hear his perception of it, much later than we hear hers in the film, because of the way their sort of screen time is split. But I think the point is that really there's not one of them who was so bad at communicating, really. They both sort of just did what people tend to do in those situations.
And Ed commented in the chat here, like, it was vague. And I think it's vague on purpose so that a lot of people have experienced this and connect to it then. But also the movie, as I said in the introduction, it tells us at the end of the first third, this thing is over. I mean, that theme coming where it does, and that floating bicycle shot, the thing's done, and so it's going to have to play out the way it's going to have to play out from then on.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that was confusing to me, because like that's initially the impression I got as well, that he was not putting in enough communication to her. But then like what confused me was it almost seemed like from his perspective, he was putting in communication and she wasn't. So I was wondering whether that was separated by time, like at the beginning he wasn't, but at the end he was. And like they kind of like almost met at the wrong time, or things happened at the wrong time. Like that was kind of where it like became confusing to me.
I think that's good. I think it's destiny, that we're supposed to get this impression that fate happens, things come about at the wrong time. Sometimes you get drafted in the Algerian War and sometimes you don't. Right? That's how it goes.
Christopher, you have a question or comment?
I did. I was just curious on your guys' take of Roland Cassard being so accepting of the child so quickly, because they lean towards the deception of them not telling him that she had a child, and how she was worried that her marrying child would mean he wouldn't accept her. But I think that was leaning more towards physical appearance than the child, because I lack the context to know the views or the laws around abortion back in the 50s, but I can't imagine it was a very normal thing to just roll up on a woman, fall in love with her, and accept the child of another man.
Well, I didn't get the sense that there was a lot of consideration within the world of the film regarding abortion. I don't know if it has to do with the religion or the legality or the general sort of view of it in France in the 60s. But what I will say is that the film doesn't really have a choice, right? If the film is going to this place where these two have good reasons to not be together at the end, and also to not run into each other's arms when they see each other like they do in the fake ending for La La Land, then he has to be the sort of guy who will do that. I also think he's clearly been wounded, right? The way he confides in the mother of this young woman he's interested in about this past heartbreak, and he expresses his reluctance to do so. And so, sometimes when someone is put through an emotional ringer like that, their priorities shift, right? And excuse me, he saw this woman that, I don't know how he became so quickly fond of her, but he became so quickly fond of her. And if he was serious about, loving her as he said he did, then something like that really shouldn't stop him. I'm saying that from sort of his character point of view. That's my take anyway. Jennifer?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think every people in the chat are noticing it's Catherine Deneuve who wouldn't accept her under any conditions. And I think that that's probably true. But he's had his heart broken. He's a romantic. We have his whole number and backstory explaining how he's a romantic. So it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to go along with this situation regardless of her pregnancy or not. I will also just add, there are very, very few films that consider abortion an actual choice. Just as a note.
Right. And at that, it wouldn't have gotten, if that had been discussed in the movie. Well, let's see, this is before Alfie mentions it, I think, and I think that's like 66 or something. But I don't know that this movie would have shown in the US if it had mentioned
Even
that.
still, there are very few films where.
Right. Absolutely. Karen, you have a question or comment? Okay. Rena, you have a question or comment?
Well, I'll just, I want to weigh in here as another person who saw this the first time when I was 15. And it was after having spent 2 summers in France with a French family. And it was in Cincinnati, Ohio. I think it was like the first, foreign film that came to Cincinnati, at least that came to any kind of venue that a 15-year-old would get to watch it in. So it was like, to me, the most amazing film at that time. And when she said, oh, you're only 16, and she said, no, I'm 17. And I really was angry with that mother. I was all in Catherine Deneuve. What does she mean? Of course I'm grown up, and and I just felt like it was such a romantic movie. And now that I watch it again, actually, I think that Geneviève kind of has met her match in that, she doesn't know what love is. I'm much more critical of her now that she, what does she know about love? And she's willing to accept someone. She didn't seem desperate. It seemed like it would be okay if she had a baby, which maybe in France it would have been then. There wouldn't have been an abortion. But anyway, it seems that in the end that Guy and Madeleine have a real relationship. That you notice in the last scene, they touch each other, they both touch the child, they interact together with the child, they've built things together. The gas station, their child, they have a shared history with Elise. they're building on something much sturdier. Whereas the Genevieve picture, she's not with her husband. She doesn't really touch her child. As a matter of fact, she's picking up her child from the in-laws where she's been staying. It's almost as if, she kind of married it. She's married into a world, but she's not a person anymore or something like that. And I think that her husband, picked her out like a jewel. He looked at her. She was beautiful. He was entranced, just like when he buys the most beautiful rubies and diamonds. And certainly it was generous of him to accept the baby, but it didn't seem like real love there at all. But I am more sympathetic to the mother looking out for her daughter's, what she perceived to be her daughter's interests, but I don't think they had a particularly healthy relationship. Anyway, that's just, and the other thing is that, you got to remember that back in the day, you couldn't make a phone call. Phone calls were too expensive. The mail sometimes came and sometimes didn't come. The fact this was from a battlefield, it wasn't, on a good day, a letter could take 2 weeks to go one direction, or at least 5 days each direction, so to have a sense of distance when you're only 16 or 17 and you were basing this, your relationship on a very romantic notion of love, and it seemed like it wasn't that long-lived relationship, of course it was going to fade. That just seemed like, I don't think either one of them was to blame for that lack of connection. I think that's just kind of how it would happen. Anyway.
Thanks, Rena.
That's what I have to say.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's part of the point of the film, and that's why there's that ambiguity about the letter writing and who wrote more and who didn't, and on it, all that stuff, because this is a relationship that seems familiar to us, if not from personal experience, then from many movies and stories, and it deteriorates in a way that is familiar to us, if not from personal experience, then from many movies and stories. And I think that's part of the point, to explore the dimensions of that. Jennifer.
Yeah, I think what you also are pointing to so well is that the idea that the romances we ended up with are class-based romances, right? One is this aspirational class romance, and the other one is a working class romance. Someone in the chat pointed to like a home healthcare worker and a guy who works at a petrol shop. Right, that's a certain kind of social class, and the other one is another. And this is the way in which this French musical differs from its American counterparts, which end, as I said in that introduction, in a heterosexual romance that resolves class differences. This doesn't resolve any class differences. And so whether that's rooted in a kind of French understanding of class structure, or a statement Demy is making about the possibilities for social mobility in France in the end of the 1950s, either way, we have a different kind of sentiment here.
Karen, you have a question or comment?
Quick question. We were talking about the fact that it's all subtitles in English. Mm-hmm. And I think it's remarkable that the main theme song of The Umbrellas of Cherbourg translates just as well in French as it does in English. So often when I am listening to opera, especially that has been put into subtitles in English as opposed to French or Italian, it's awkward. Somehow this film, has a marvelous theme song that is equally as beautiful in English as it is in French. And I think the second thing I'd like to say is that being a teenager in the 60s, the idea in France that is a Catholic country of having abortion would never, ever have been considered. I think that she was realistic, but I think that the characters were by the director and by the script were manipulated to make it all sort of work out.
Thanks, Karen.
Okay.
Yeah, I am surprised at, in a sense, I think we all deserve a little bit of credit for, I'm not an opera goer, and I understand that operas a lot of times have super titles and subtitles, even when you're there in live performance, and that's part of the deal. But the idea of watching, a lot of people don't want to watch subtitled movies to begin with, but a subtitled musical, I think, is an extra layer of challenge, unless you happen to know be familiar with the original language, which I am not. But I think you're right. When things work out that way, that it plays as well as it does in one language, as it does in the other. I think that is a rare thing. Jennifer.
I don't know if that I have anything to add to that necessarily. I think that's true, Karen. And I like that you make a comment about the possibility that the director is manipulating the characters. I mean, that's great. He is a kind of puppeteer in a way, putting people in the positions he wants them to be in, and allowing only a certain set of resolutions to take place that he's going to allow. That's right. Demy did say this was one of the most glorious periods of his life, making this film. So he said it was beyond sublime, that nobody could say goodbye at the end. And if you look online, you'll find a cast photo of them all standing outside the shop that Varda herself took. So I like the moment of this movie and Varda and Demy's relationship, and the burgeoning stardom of Catherine Deneuve. It's just such a moment of promise. So yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to say that. Also, the kids in the film, I didn't point this out in the introduction, but Françoise is Rosalie Varda Demy. So Varda's daughter, who Jacques Demy adopted, and little François is Le Grand's son, the composer's son. So that's kind of nice that these cameos are children of the makers of the film.
Says the woman who puts her own children in her musical films and films of other genres.
Yeah, I made him learn French this year because we're homeschooling and no one's checking what I'm doing. So maybe I was stating the obvious, that I wasn't sure it was obvious to you. So I wanted to make sure you took that lesson. Let's see. Arlene, you have a question or comment?
Yes, I was personally very sad that she never went back to Cherbourg after she got married. I personally had a relationship with Cherbourg because I went on an elder hostel that the whole group of us had homestays in Cherbourg for a week. And we got to know the people of the town, and we got to know some of the residences. You saw the outside of the houses, but you didn't see that many of the houses that were there in Cherbourg had these charming interior gardens, and the closeness of the people in Cherbourg. And it was really a beautiful little tight-knit community, at least the people that we met, who made it a point of being hosts to all of us and taking us on excursions and taking us to see the Normandy beachfronts and all the things. We went about 50 years after the Normandy invasion, and it was right before they had the celebration there. So I really was very, very fond of Cherbourg, and it really made me sad that she went away and completely left the whole life of Cherbourg.
Yeah, it is an interesting point that she doesn't go back, as if she doesn't really want to think about that whole time in her life, a time that obviously had its challenges, but also seems, to the outside observer, to have a lot of promise and opportunity. Yeah.
I think that the whole idea of nostalgia is you can never go home again. So if she were to go back, we would kind of eliminate that possibility of longing for the past that the film seems to introduce from the very beginning. But I also think Bryn Mawr Film Institute should organize a post-pandemic trip for all of us to Cherbourg, to take the Umbrellas of Cherbourg tour, which is a walking tour. One can go on. That would be very fun.
That sounds wonderful. I'd love to go to Cherbourg.
Thanks, Jennifer.
You're welcome.
Let's see. Alan, you have a question or comment?
Yes, in the end of the movie, he doesn't want to see his biological child. And what do you think is the reason for all of that?
That's an interesting question. I think that it's a very, this is something else that I could imagine the perception of it changing over time, both over the changes over the years and also changes in audiences' personal lives, right? And does he not want to see her because he feels nothing, or does he not want to see her because he is afraid he will feel too much? You know, and we don't know. And I think one of the things I like about the end, which an ending in a movie which is in many ways sort of very kind of, you know, excessive in that melodramatic sense, I like how understated that little point of discussion is. Jennifer.
I would guess it's your second one, because he's such a romantic, as we've seen throughout the film. He likes, you know, to go to the cinema, to go to Carmen at the beginning. He's singing about these things, and we see his love throughout. So I would imagine he's afraid of ripping open the relationship that he has with Madeline and his son and exposing himself to the past. But I don't really know either. And I agree with what you said, that I think that choice doesn't play as well now as it might have at the time.
We do have a question that came in through the chat about the significance of the title, and obviously the shop, and that being the business that the family is in, has some relevance, as well as the way the film opens in the rain and we see the weather and the seasons. But I'm wondering if Jennifer, you might have any other thoughts on the significance of the title.
I was hoping other people would. I mean, I'm thinking that an umbrella is a kind of something that protects us from the elements, that allows us to feel safe, but is actually really a ruse because it can be blown away so easily. It's not a solid piece of equipment like a washing machine that comes in at the end. So in that way, it could be like the love that, you know, sort of seems to keep them safe, but doesn't. But I'd be more interested in hearing if other people have suggestions, because that's kind of
I mean, in a way, there's a way in which an umbrella, and particularly it seemed to me the type of umbrellas they sold in that shop, is a romantic object in and of itself, right? That it is, you know, in many cases used as an accent. It is used as much for how it looks as for what utilitarian purpose it might have. That it is. There are umbrella people and there are not umbrella people. And, you know, I think it's also interesting that there are times in the movie when we see each of the main characters soaked through from the weather for lack of an umbrella. And so I think that there's something about the, you know, something about the gap between the usefulness and the aesthetic of it and pragmatism versus sort of, you know, appearance, that there's something there, but I'm not really sure. And nothing like ending a discussion on a note where the two moderators have nothing of substance to say, but it won't be the last time. It may be the first time, but it won't be the last time, particularly when I'm involved. So thank you all very much for joining us. We have a number of our Tuesday night seminars coming up, including tomorrow night on various screen iterations of Macbeth. Then coming up, we have the first of two seminars on Fritz Lang. The first one focuses on his work in the German cinema, the second one on his work in Hollywood, and then another one of our focuses on short films, taught by film critic Gary Kramer, who goes to festivals and picks out some wonderful short films to discuss. And then you can see that we have that second part of Fritz Lang, And then I'll be talking about the Oscars, both the traditional history and format, as well as some of the new rules and procedures that are in place for this most unusual year at the movies and in other ways as well. So please consider signing up for one of those. If you want to know about what we have coming up, if you want to receive a link to the weekly introduction to each film, as well as links to film-related puzzles, ways to find out where our archive of these discussions are, the Ask Andrew mini lessons, all of that, please visit our website and sign up for our emails. Every Thursday, we let you know what the movie being discussed the following Monday is. We include a link to the introduction. They are not all family studded musical numbers, but some of them are, and this one certainly was, but they are all informative because we have wonderful instructors who know a lot and care a lot about the movies that they suggest. We also have new releases that you can only get through theaters like ours at theater5.org. A lot of opportunities, director talkbacks, other discussions, and new movies you can't see anywhere else that we would be showing on our screens if we were open. But since we're not yet open, though we are working on it, check them out in Theater 5. And as always, if you have the means and are so inclined, we would greatly appreciate your financial support as well. As I said, we are putting things in place to reopen. We hope to reopen before too long, and we're working hard at it. But until we are able to do that, and until there are great movies to show and people to come see them, we would love your support to allow us to keep putting on programs like this one and the other things that we're able to offer to the wonderful community that you all have helped create at Bryn Mawr Film Institute. So thank you very much, everyone. Jennifer, thank you so much, as always. And thanks so much for joining us, everyone. And take care.
Bye.
Au revoir.